Drive safe. Get ready to turn left. Turn left. Keep right, and then turn right. Turn right. Keep right, and then exit right. Exit right.
Everyone, contact the Russell Strong, 57X. This has a report PG-13 and 12 speed. Starting with the middle part of the Grand data. So we'll start with Grand Island, Alaska today. We take
Straight on.
starting with first group that we want to be pretty sure to have Mike, and I hope that they're going to need it for the fall, when the fall comes. And anyway, let me put the radio on first, and then we'll get started. And we'll continue
Comes from the station and from Progressive Insurance with Snapshot,
this
a
highway
personalized
and
program that bases
pick it
rates
up.
on safe
So,
driving habits at
check it out.
progressive.com. Not available in California or from all agents. From Fisher Investments. As a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is obligated to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at fisherinvestments.com. Investing in securities involves the risk of loss. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. And now we have a Guantanamo update that involves this news organization. We here at NPR are part of a group of media organizations asking a judge to show the public the plea deals reached with the alleged mastermind of the September 11th terror attacks. That's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, also with two other 9/11 defendants. Those plea deals were quickly rescinded by the U.S. Defense Secretary. They are under court-ordered seal. NPR's Sasha Pfeiffer covers Guantanamo. Hey, Sasha.
Hi, Mary Louise.
Okay, so it's been, just more than a month since the world learned these plea deals existed. Things have moved so fast since then. Catch us up.
Yes, and usually you would never use the word fast related to Guantanamo.
Indeed.
This is a place where it seems like nothing happens for years. But recently, really startling news coming out of there. And since so many people have just forgotten that Guantanamo is open or that it exists, I'll remind everyone, we're talking about the U.S. military court in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. That's where the 9/11 case is being prosecuted.
Well, and where it is still not going to trial, even though those attacks happened more than 20 years ago.
Exactly. But on July 31st, there was a surprise announcement that settlement agreements had been reached with three men charged in the case, including, as you said, the ringleader, KSM. The next day, August 1st, the plea deals got filed under seal. The day after that, August 2nd, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said, nope, he retracted the deals, and he stripped the head of the military court of her authority to make plea deals in the case. That's even though that is part of her authority. That caused uproar among Guantanamo defense attorneys. They said what Austin did was illegal. It also upset some victim family members who support the plea deals. And ever since, those retracted settlement agreements have been hidden from the public.
And do we have any idea what is in them?
We know the basic outline. We know that the three men would plead guilty to nearly 3,000 counts of murder. That's for all the people who died in the 9/11 attacks. In return, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed would get life in prison rather than face a death penalty trial. Part of the reason we want to see the retracted plea deals is to find out if the two other men, their names are Walid Benatash and Mustafa al-Hassawi, whether they would also get life, presumably, or if they would get shorter sentences.
And tell me, I've been trying to puzzle this out. Why did the defense secretary get involved? Why did he rescind these plea deals?
This is so baffling, and it has been so controversial because the head of the military court is meant to be independent. It's a woman right now, and she does not need the defense secretary's permission to make deals. But Lloyd Austin said he was caught off guard and that a decision to settle the case is so monumental that he alone should be the one to make it. Now, he did this after complaints by other 9/11 family members and by members of Congress who said the defendants were getting off too easy. So it is unclear whether Austin caved to political pressure.
Okay, go to the legal argument. What is the argument that NPR and these other media outlets are making for why the now rescinded settlement agreement should become public?
It's a transparency accountability argument. As we all know, September 11th was one of the most devastating terror attacks on U.S. soil, continues to have global consequences. This is the largest criminal prosecution in U.S. history. And when the government keeps the plea agreement secret, that risks undermining public trust in what is happening down there in Cuba in the military court. Speculation can end up filling that void. And it is not just NPR making this argument. Our media partners in this to unseal the records are the New York Times, the Washington Post, Associated Press, NBC News, Fox News, and Univision.
Sasha, we've got about 30 seconds left, but when are we and our media partners going to find out if this legal motion succeeds?
We don't know, unfortunately. But this month, the 9/11 judge will hear arguments about whether Austin did something illegal by reversing the plea deals and if they should be reinstated. They said that he wrongfully meddled in a decision made by a subordinate. And by the way, prosecutors themselves say it would be best to settle. The consensus is that there's a state of futility of the 9/11 case. There will never be a trial, but that is hard for many people to accept.
NPR's Sasha Pfeiffer, thank you.
You're welcome.
There is no place to legally buy marijuana for recreational use in much of the South. That changes this weekend when the Eastern Band of Cherokee in North Carolina will open a dispensary for recreational marijuana sales. Lily Knepp from Blue Ridge Public Radio reports tribal sovereignty will test the legal lines of this new venture.
Tucked in the mountains of western North Carolina, a farm sits hidden off the main road near the banks of the Tuckasegee River. 2 years ago, the Eastern Band of Cherokee started planting a new crop here, cannabis.
This week, tomorrow, actually, we're going to be planting over 12,000 seeds. So today we're getting ready for that.
Angelita Gomez has worked on the farm for over a year. She tends to thousands of cannabis seedlings here until they are ready to be planted in nearby greenhouses. Those plants will eventually become a product in the tribe's new business venture, a marijuana dispensary. The seed-to-sale operation is a point of pride for Gomez.
There's nothing else I'd want to do. I'm so proud to work here. I'm so proud to be growing this medicine for our tribe and our people.
On Saturday, the tribe will expand from the medical marijuana sales that started in April to recreational sales for everyone over the age of 21. Forrest Parker, executive director of Koala Enterprises, the tribe's cannabis company, says the business is growing.
As we go into full adult use so that we can really be positioned to, supply the most robust menu that anyone that has ever seen in cannabis. That's our goal.
Parker knows that this will likely be the only legal dispensary in the Southeast for recreational marijuana. And tribal leadership has been clear. Tribal sovereignty ends once customers set foot off tribal lands. State lawmakers have been open to medical marijuana sales, but draw the line at recreational use. North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore told local Charlotte TV station WCNC that he doesn't want it.
I do oppose, by the way, recreational use. I think that opens the door to a lot of problems, and I oppose that.
The local district attorney's office says they recognize tribal sovereignty, but have not said if they will crack down on drug possession outside tribal lands. The Eastern Band of Cherokee is setting precedent, says Rob Harrell, founder of the Indigenous Cannabis Association. He says it's the only tribe to sell in a state where marijuana is still illegal.
I'm really not aware of another tribe doing what Eastern Band is doing, specifically in markets like North Carolina where it's not legal yet.
Perro says because legal sales are so restricted in the Southeast, the potential revenue is higher than for tribes in the West where marijuana is also sold by the state.
I think it's going to be absolutely massive. Whether it's 5, 10, or 20 times, I think has yet to be seen what the potential revenue can be.
The Eastern Band hopes this is true. Part of their business model is offering a wide variety of cannabis products. Over 250 will be available on opening day, from joints and traditional cannabis to candy, body oils, and dog treats. For NPR News, I'm Lily Knepp in Cherokee, North Carolina.
And in Houston at 6:28, you've been listening to All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 887. Marketplace is 2 minutes away.
PBS NewsHour.
Now more than ever, you need news you can trust.
PBS NewsHour.
Unbiased, in-depth news that delivers substance over sensationalism.
PBS NewsHour.
Cutting through the noise with news that matters. World-class journalism that brings unrivaled national and global perspective home to you.
PBS NewsHour.
Elections, conflict, climate. Trust a news source that provides fair, thoughtful coverage of the events that impact our lives.
PBS NewsHour. Weeknights at 6 on Houston Public Media TV 8.
Some things in life are difficult, but making a difference in our community shouldn't be. Why not take your old or unused vehicle and donate it to Houston Public Media? Take something you're not using and turn it into something you can't get enough of. We'll handle the paperwork, provide free contactless pickup of your car, and issue you a tax receipt. If it's not in the best condition, don't worry about it. We'll take it. Call 877-252-0436 or donate online at houstonpublicmedia.org/vehicles.
A spy arrives in rural France. Her goal, to sabotage an agrarian commune.
She sets out to destroy people's lives, and the only backstory she shares with the reader is other situations where she meant to destroy lives.
Rachel Kushner's new novel, Creation Lake, and the latest news, Saturday and weekend edition from NPR News.
We'll have that for you tomorrow morning starting at 7, followed by Planet Money and How I Built This at 9, and then Wait, Don't Tell Me at 10.
Support comes from John Moore, helping with plumbing, electrical, and air conditioning repairs, including out-of-warranty units since 1965. Details at 730-2525 or at johnmooreservices.com.
It's 6:30.
Marketplace is supported by Babbel for Business. With over 13,000 hours of language courses, Babbel is helping businesses break down language barriers and improve workplace safety. Learn more at babbelforbusiness.com.
On the program today, jobs, new ones, old ones, we got them all. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by C3 Generative AI. Verifiable, traceable answers, secure, hallucination-free, LLM-agnostic, IP liability-free. C3.ai. This is Enterprise AI. And by JLL, helping clients find, design, occupy, manage, and invest in commercial real estate solutions. JLL.com. JLL. See a brighter way.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Rizdal. It is Friday today, everybody, the 6th of September. Good as always to have you along. Jobs are where we're going to start. Jobs will probably be where we end, maybe with a detour into the Fed somewhere in the middle. I don't know. Maybe something else if it comes to mind. Rachel Siegel is at the Washington Post. Lynette Lopez is at Business Insider. Hey, you two.
Hi, Kai.
Lynette, let me start with you. The July jobs report. August jobs report. Hello. Come on, I've been off for 3 days. 4.2% on the unemployment rate, 142,000 new jobs. Is it cooling nicely, the American labor market, or is it cooling too fast?
I think it's cooling nicely, in part because we're still seeing wage growth that is outpacing the rate of inflation. So we're still seeing 3-point-something-ish, I think it was 2% wage growth, so that's nice. We're slowing, but we're not screeching to a halt, and we're still seeing robust hours worked. We had to revise down the last couple of months, but there's nothing that says help recession coming. We're still seeing still seeing a solid job market.
Okay. Rachel, here comes the detour into the Fed. Everybody's banking it. Well, not everybody. Talk before this morning had been, it's going to be probably 25 basis points, quarter percentage point. Now it's, half the people who guess at these sort of things professionally are saying it might be, 50 basis points, a whole half percentage point. If they go to half, does that imply panic to you?
Definitely. And that would be the point of a 50 basis point cut. The Fed has other ways of getting to that scale. They can issue 2 25 basis point cuts the next couple of months and get to that same place. But a stronger cut just in 2 weeks would signal something much more serious, would signal this deep-seated worry that they have about the job market, and that's a signal they want to get out and really put out there as aggressively as possible. That generally is not the Fed's way of going about things. They prefer to be more steady, more measured, move more slowly. But if they decide that actually they need to send a little bit more of a siren, that's exactly the way that they would do it.
Lynette, do you think they have a siren in mind? I mean, look, they were late in the beginning of inflation, right? They missed it by, a meeting or 2 or 3 or 4. Maybe they don't want to mess around on the back end?
I think, nobody wants panic.
Yeah.
What we're seeing in the markets today is already the market's kind of reacting to what's about to happen and to the idea of a slowdown. And all of this is being communicated very clearly, not just in the United States, but globally. So I don't think a 50 basis point would kind of admit, okay, this has gotten out of our hands in a way that the Fed had to admit when it started its hiking cycle. They had to say, okay, we're way behind. But it doesn't necessarily seem to be the case here at all.
Let me ask you, actually, since you mentioned the markets, which today we're down again, and it's been a rough week, they do seem a little skittish, a little jittery. And I guess why, given that the fundamentals really don't reflect what is going on in the equities markets?
Well, the equities markets were screaming up because despite the fact that we had higher interest rates, the economy and the jobs market were still booming. And now it looks like the economy is slowing down and the stock market is repricing. So I don't think it should be that shocking that as the economy slows and we kind of, again, try to find this neutral, normal growth cycle, that stocks start to think, okay, where is money really going to be flowing in an economy that is not as hot and not as strange. Because remember, before things were hot, things were weird. And before things were weird, we were getting out of the financial crisis. So this is like a whole new normal that the market hasn't understood for the last 14, 15 years. And I think the stock market is reflecting that confusion.
Rachel, I heard your there in the middle of that. Talk more about why the whole, transition from strange to not hot is a thing that everybody's sort of like, I don't know what's going on, man.
No, and I was talking to someone today, and we were sort of, observing that we still are in this murky period where it feels like officials are saying, well, the next report will be more clarifying. And then we get to that next report. Yes. And then it's the one after that. This August jobs report was supposed to be really important and supposed to clarify whether July was the marker of the slowing market or that, it was more of a one-off. And somehow we didn't really get a clear answer. We all kind of read the report and called around, and it was like, well, and the officials were talking today, and they still didn't really come down one way or the other. And that just sort of kicks the ball down the road. And then we'll get to the September meeting, and Powell will, as he is wont to do, leave the door open for future decisions. This is just kind of the mode that I think we're very used to, but it doesn't come with a whole lot of answers in the meantime.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally right. Lynette, talk to me for a second about the revisions on the jobs, and I think it was like 86,000 revised downward over the past couple of months. Lots of hay has been made of that, I think, in the last 8-ish hours since the report came out, whatever it is. You worried about that? Downward revisions?
I mean, yeah, we're worried about the slowing jobs market in general, but I still don't think that we're seeing an economy or job market where we're seeing a ton of layoffs that are material. And the unemployment rate is still relatively low, and we're still seeing wage growth, and we're seeing people rejoin the labor supply. So this is not like a labor market that looks sick. It's a labor market that looks weird. Yeah. And I think that's something that we should expect after kind of turning the economy off and then turning it back on again. There's really no precedent for what we're dealing with, and there are all these different indicators like the SOM rule or the inverted curve or whatever you want, but these are all just statistical ways of reading the economy, and there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And this is a very strange situation, so we can't tether ourselves to any of those things. We have to look at the picture holistically, and when we look at it, we still see low unemployment rate, we still see healthy jobs market, we still see wages increasing, and we see inflation going down. So directionally, it's what we want.
Rachel, I am loath to do this, but I'm going to end by asking you about the vibes, because sort of what Lynette just said was, there's data, but vibes, man. Yes or no?
Kai, we can't have a conversation without talking about the vibes. The vibes I feel like are a little, what would the right word be? Almost like a little like wait and see question mark, which is the position we've been in. I mean, the vibes could be good, just depending on all of the data points that Lynette just lined out. But there's all this criticism mounting on the Fed that they're falling behind yet again, and that they're going to be too late, and that the job market can weaken really fast, which sort of puts a cloud over what could otherwise be a pretty positive report.
Rachel Siegel at the Washington Post, Lynette Lopez at Insider. Thanks, you two.
Thanks, Kai.
Have a nice weekend. On Wall Street today, as Lynette was talking about, a little jittery. We'll have the details when we do the numbers.
Go straight on.
So as we were just talking about, that jobs report was a bit of a mixed bag this morning. Decent, but not great number of jobs created. Unemployment did go down. Do not sleep, however, on the key money in people's pockets data point. Lynette was talking about this. Average hourly earnings were up 0.4% last month, which was a bigger gain than July and more than people had been expecting. And workers were clocking into the office a bit more last month, with the average work week up 1/10 of an hour. Yes, that extra 6 minutes. Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman is on that one.
Honestly, what's not to like in the earning power section of this jobs report? American workers got a $1.30 pay bump on average compared to what they were making a year ago, to $35.21 an hour. Jane Oates is a policy analyst at Working Nation.
I think it's great. Year over year, we've seen about a 3.8% increase in overall wages.
Keep in mind, inflation's running under 3% a year now, so real earnings, the purchasing power of workers' take-home pay after rising prices, continue to improve. But remember, rising wages weren't always considered such a good thing in this economy. 2 years ago, when wages were climbing at 6% a year, Fed policymakers worried it was helping to drive price inflation higher. And now?
This should be satisfying to the Fed, looking at their 2% inflation rate.
Dean Baker at the Center for Economic and Policy Research says the key is the strong productivity of American workers, lately growing at more than 2%. I was a bit confused, so I asked him to explain.
If we're producing 2% more an hour, we're paying, let's say, 4% higher wages, then the cost per unit is only rising by 2%, which presumably that gets passed on to prices. That's 2% inflation.
But these higher wages don't necessarily feel all that great, says Sophia Baig at polling firm Morning Consult.
Consumers are reporting softening feelings about the economy when it comes to the current purchasing power and their current personal finances.
Especially consumers who've been pushed to the limit by higher prices.
Middle and low-income consumers have had a drawdown in their savings, whereas high-income consumers, their stock of savings has been increasing.
Higher wages, more savings, plus investment gains, that's what really makes consumer sentiment and spending sing. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
The time has come with the waning days of summer to bring our summer series, My Analog Life, to an end. Snapshots of how technology has changed our jobs. 3 stories through the show today of analog jobs from 3 of our regulars. First up is Gretchen Blau. She's a customs broker at Logistics Plus in Erie, PA.
I started at Logistics Plus 16, 17 years ago. We started doing customs brokerage about 11 years ago. We used to use the fax machine a lot. What we would do would be if Customs CBP would request documents to look at, we would fax them. We'd have to print out the file, then we'd have to scan it into the fax, and then send the fax. So it's a little bit cumbersome when you have to do it that way. I had one port where I went to fax something and I said, well, I put on the cover sheet. No, you're not supposed to have a cover sheet. We have too big a volume. We can't do the cover sheet. Okay, fine. So how do I know that you got the fax? I'm just calling to confirm. Well, then you have to look at the readout on your fax machine. Which, okay, that's cool. But I know it's sent properly. I know it says that it received properly, but did someone in your office lose it from getting from the fax machine to your desk? What's different now in terms of filing any kind of paperwork with Customs is it's stored in our system. We just do a couple clicks and indicate which files we want to upload. We hit a button and then we get a verification in our email. We're not using faxes at all if we can avoid it. We always ask people to email the documents, or we will email the documents to them, just because it's so cumbersome and we don't have a dedicated fax machine anymore.
Gretchen Blau, Logistics Plus, Erie, PA is where she is. More analog memories from Marketplace regulars in just a little bit. Coming up,
the beginning of my career and probably my retirement will occur in the same city.
Got to be consistent, right? First, though, let's do the numbers. Yeah, the Wawas. Maybe for the week, too. It was a weird week. Dow Industrial's off 410 points, 1%, 40,345 for the blue chips. NASDAQ off 436 points, 2 6/10%, finished at 16,690. The S&P 500 gave back 94 points, about 1.7%, ended things at 54 and 8. For the week, the Dow lost 2.7%, the Nasdaq dropped 5 8/10%, the S&P 500 down 4 1/4%. I will note here that today is National 401k Day. Do not, repeat, do not check your 401k on days like this. Mitchell was talking about today's jobs report. Here are some healthcare stocks, which did add jobs in the last month. Tenet Healthcare Corporation down 5.3%. Johnson & Johnson down 0.4%. Abbott Labs up 0.7%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by the Pacero Center for Financial Markets and Policy, presenting the Financial Markets Quality Conference, an opportunity to explore the intersection of finance and policy with global financial leaders at Georgetown University on September 17th. And by Bitwarden Password Manager. Bitwarden is designed to offer password security from any device at any location, securing both sensitive business information and personal accounts. Learn more at bitwarden.com. And by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness and accelerating action on America's fiscal challenges to build a brighter economic future for the next generation. Learn more at pgpf.org.
At 6:46, you're listening to News 88.7.
1 year after the Supreme Court banned affirmative action, we're seeing racial diversity decreasing, but economic diversity actually seems to have gone up.
That's exactly right. And that's not a pattern that many people would necessarily have expected. And it's a fascinating pattern. And that, of course, raises the question of why is that happening?
I'm Katrin Benholt. That's Today on the Daily from the New York Times.
And we'll have that for you next at 7, followed by Today Explained at 7:30.
Support comes from Comcast Business. From Main Street to Wall Street, Comcast Business provides business solutions ranging from cybersecurity solutions to round-the-clock partnership, powering possibilities. Restrictions apply.
Support comes from St. Luke's Health and St. Luke's Foundation, supporting clinical excellence, compassionate care, and a healthier future for all. More at supportstlukes.org.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Risdal. Mortgage rates, as we approach the ever more anticipated Fed interest rate cut in a couple of weeks, have fallen pretty sharply. Freddie Mac has the average on a 30-year fixed right around 6.35%. That's as of yesterday. And it's about 1.5 percentage points below where it was not even a year ago. It does still, yes, put a home out of reach for would-be buyers, most of them anyway. But the thing about real estate is that it just ain't done the way it used to be. Here is the next Marketplace Regulars installment of our series, My Analog Life.
I've been in real estate since October of 1998. What was interesting about real estate back then is the internet was still in its infant stages. So people weren't constantly surfing real estate websites. You would get these home notebooks, you would find the new listings, and then you would go look at them on behalf of your clients. If there was very strong interest, you would get, I'm laughing thinking about this, get a disposable camera where you could take photos, then hustle off to the 1-hour photo lab and take it from there. We actually would have to, in many cases, go present an offer to the listing agent, which as a rookie was just flat out terrifying to me. You know, it's one thing to present a stinker of an offer over the phone and, you know, just say, hey, do your best, to having the agent look over the pages with a slight glare in their eye, and you're like, well, okay. When I started in the late 90s, establishing a name and a presence in a city of about 70,000, the way we did it back then was consistency. Print advertising, television commercials, billboards, and as print advertising has gone, agents are trying to become real estate influencers. That fascinates me. And I am so happy to be on this end
of my career.
Mindy Palmer doing real estate in Missoula, Montana. One more installment coming up in a second. This is going to sound maybe a little counterintuitive, but you know what the biggest problem is for some of those big government programs? Not the established ones like Social Security or Medicare, but the newer ones. And I'm thinking here specifically about the Inflation Reduction Act, which has been law now for about 2 years and had almost $370 billion in it for everything from solar farm projects to that heat pump that your neighbor just installed. Anyway, you know what the biggest challenge has been? Actually getting the money out the door. In those 2 years, states and consumers have claimed about 7% of the available money. 7%. That's according to a report from the sustainability think tank RMI. And as Marketplace's Kaylee Wells reports, some states have been doing a whole lot better than others have.
Louisiana and West Virginia are bringing up the rear, each claiming less than 1% of their potential IRA dollars. At the top of the leaderboard are Connecticut, New Mexico, Tennessee, and Georgia. They each secured more than 13% of potential funding. But the number one spot belongs to Nevada, and it is running away in this race. The state has already claimed 54% of its potential funding.
I was impressed to see that data as well.
Dwayne McClinton directs the Nevada Governor's Office of Energy. He says his boss, Republican Governor Joe Lombardo, is interested in the energy security that comes with dirtier sources like gas, at least more interested than his Democratic predecessor. But his office is all for clean energy too, and the funding that comes with it.
If there's a benefit to Nevadans or a benefit to, your residents, why not take advantage of it, and let's not let politics get in the way of that.
That seems to be the thinking in a lot of states. The highest per capita clean energy investments last year were in Wyoming, Nevada, West Virginia, Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, none of them Democratic strongholds.
We see a strong interest in clean energy projects coming from Republican governors all over the place.
RMI Senior Principal Jacob Corviday co-authored the report. He says some states are playing catch-up.
Places that haven't done as much historically have a bigger opportunity. Wyoming, Georgia, Nevada showing up as places that have already secured, in some cases, a lot of good work, but also places that have a lot of potential for what's needing to happen.
His other finding, the states leading the pack right now are the ones that have gotten the biggest, most expensive projects approved.
A lot of the money that's flowed in a big way so far has been support for large, clean manufacturing projects or just large-scale energy projects.
So, for example, the subsidy a state gets when its residents buy EVs trickles in a couple $1,000s at a time.
Whereas like one major manufacturing project comes in or one major utility overhaul comes in, and you've got a huge chunk of cash dropping at once.
That's likely what's happening in Connecticut, says Jason Velasquez. He's the Climate, Energy, and Justice Policy Associate at a nonprofit called the Acadia Center. And he says Connecticut has secured several IRA awards, but the big one is a plan for an interstate freight corridor lined with EV chargers.
Given that those transportation sectors are largest emitter in the state, having that is a really, really big push for us.
Velasquez also says Connecticut is an early leader because the state had several plans ready to go when the IRA funding became available.
A lot of these programs and policies were already sort of being either passed through legislation or being supported through budgetary means, but having the supplemental capacity of the IRA really just boosts some of those efforts.
Now, obviously, there are only so many big-ticket projects, so the laggards could start catching up as the early leaders turn to the slow-trickling funding, the heat pump and EV adoption tax credits. But Jacob Corviday says that gap will only close if the lagging states start playing the game.
Or are we going to see sort of winners and losers emerging depending on who manages to secure both the large projects and a broad adoption of these technologies?
We're 2 years in, which means the IRA's got 8 to go. States that want funding for carbon capture, energy-efficient homes, and clean vehicles have until 2032 to apply for it, presuming the next administration continues to support it. I'm Kaylee Wells for Marketplace.
Last up on our trip down my analog life memory lane to hear about the once upon a time of our jobs today, we've called our regular banking person, Lori Stewart. She's the CEO and president of Sound Community Bank up in Seattle, Washington.
I am happy to share with you that I have been a banker since I was a freshman in college going to the University of Washington, right here in Seattle. The beginning of my career and probably my retirement will occur in the same city. I started in the bank in the beginning of the year in 1968. When I think about how the role of a teller has changed, there's only about one constant over the years, and that's that there's still money, cash money involved. But other than that, it's really different. Much of my job involved people bringing their passbooks in. And we had ledger cards, which nobody probably even knows what a ledger card is, but a stiff card that would fit in this great big posting machine that had the record of the individual passbook. And so you'd put the ledger card in the machine and you put the passbook in the machine and you'd post. Did they make a deposit or did they make a withdrawal or did they get some cash? Those days are totally gone. I do miss those customer interactions. We're all so busy now. Customers will text me as much as call me or stop in to see me, so it's less personal and connected. But I don't miss any of that other stuff. I don't miss posting in those passbooks or putting micker and coding on the bottom of checks so they could run through the system. We don't even clear checks now. They stop. We just send an electronic image. So I don't miss any of that stuff.
Also, checks? Lori Stewart, community banker, starting and likely ending her career in that same city. That's it for this series now, but if you do want to tell us about your job, analog or otherwise, write to us, would you? Marketplace.org/myeconomy is where you do that.
Marketplace is supported by Odoo, designed to save time on business management with one simple user-friendly software. ODOO.com. Everything any business will ever need. And by You.com, using AI to power workplace productivity. AI agents that help with research, multi-step problem solving, and content creation. YOU.com. And by Modern Treasury, built to automate payment operations with real-time financial data, smart workflows, and instant payment rails. ModernTreasury.com. Payment operations built for the instant economy.
This final note on the way out today, I do not want to be that guy, but it is kind of my job. The jobs report this morning, the unemployment rate falling to 4.2 from 4.3%. If you take it out to the next decimal place, which some of us do, in July, unemployment was 4.25%. August was 4.22. Rounding matters, people. Rounding matters. Our theme music was composed by B.J. Liederman. Marketplace's executive producer is Nancy Fargali. Donna Tam is the executive editor, and Neil Scarborough is the vice president and general manager. I'm Kai Risdale. Have yourselves a great weekend, everybody. We will see you back here on Monday, all right? This is APN.
We're a minute away from 7 o'clock on a Friday evening on your NPR station, News 88.7. One last look at the drive home finds a pair of wrecks. Northbound 45 heading out North Freeway at West Road, a wreck in the two center lanes, and eastbound I-10, Baytown East at Lockwood. The left lane taken up with the wreck there.
Support comes from Baylor College of Medicine, creating tomorrow's medicine today. Known for their medical research and innovation, Baylor pushes boundaries through health discoveries and their pursuit to improve the health of humankind.
Sunset at 7:37. What is left of the scattered showers should be out by mid to late evening. After that, cloudy and breezy with a low of 73. Tomorrow's sunrise, 7:02. Mostly sunny with high around 87, and the exact same thing on Sunday. Currently, it's 80 here at the UH campus, and this is your NPR station, KUHF Houston News, 88.7 service of the University of Houston. I'm David Pedman. Thanks for hanging out with us today. I'll be back with you Monday afternoon at 2.
There is no perfect proxy for race in the United States of America. Our racial gaps are just too big. So even if colleges leaned heavily into economic affirmative action, they really might not be able to replicate the percentage, particularly of Black and Native students, that they had before affirmative action was outlawed by the Supreme Court.
I'm Katrin Benholt. That's today on The Daily from the New York Times.
The Daily is supported by BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 35,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at betterhelp.com/public. Innovative, immersive, and skillfully investigated. The Daily brings listeners today's stories as only the New York Times can report them. Let's find a new route. Go to nytimes.com/The Daily.
Go straight on.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. The 14-year-old accused of opening fire at a Georgia high school, killing 4 people, and the teen's father will both remain in jail after back-to-back court hearings today. As Shemaine Cruz from member station WABE reports, their lawyers declined to seek bail.
Colt Gray appeared in front of the judge for the first time at a courthouse an hour away from Atlanta, shackled at the wrist and ankles, and dressed in khaki pants and a green shirt. The judge overseeing the case advised him of his rights and told him that because of his age, he is not eligible for the death penalty. Instead, the maximum penalty for the 4 counts of felony murder he faces is life without parole. His father, 54-year-old Colin Gray, faces up to 180 years in prison. Authorities say he allowed his son to possess the weapon used in the shooting. He has been charged with second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and cruelty to children. Their next court appearance will be in December. For NPR News, I'm Shemaine Cruz in Atlanta.
The Justice Department says a Pakistani national now faces federal charges for planning a terror attack against a Jewish community in New York City. The alleged plot was timed to occur around the anniversary of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. Here's NPR's Ryan Lucas.
Court papers identified the defendant as 20-year-old Mohammed Shazib Khan. He was arrested in Canada, where he lives, earlier this week. He's been charged in New York with attempting to provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization. Prosecutors say Khan is a supporter of ISIS and planned to carry out a mass shooting in the terrorist group's name at a Jewish religious center in Brooklyn on or near October 7th. Khan was arrested in Canada before crossing into the U.S. on his way to New York. The alleged plot is the latest example of what senior Justice Department and FBI officials have said is a surge in threats against the Jewish community since the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. Ryan Lucas, NPR News.
Former Republican Vice President Dick Cheney now says he intends to vote for Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. His daughter, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, also said she'll vote for Harris. Speaking in Austin, Texas, Liz Cheney said she's been impressed by the current vice president's performance and less impressed with the performance of the current GOP candidates.
It seems on many days that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are doing everything they can to drive Reagan Republicans away.
Former Vice President Dick Cheney has been an outspoken critic of the former president, calling him, quote, a coward who tried to steal the last election. While created as an independent federal agency to safeguard employee rights, including the right to organize and seek better working conditions, online retailer Amazon intends the structure of the National Labor Relations Board is unconstitutional, and by one of a growing number of companies that have accused the NLRB of improperly influencing. You're listening to NPR. But Mpox cases in Africa are spiking, with more than 5,000 cases reported this week. Health authorities there worry with the start of the school year, more children will be exposed. NPR's Gabrielle Emanuel has more.
At the epicenter of the outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the majority of cases are in children. Mpox is a virus that can spread through close contact. Matshidiso Moeti is with the World Health Organization.
Very important for the students, the families, the school authorities to be made aware of the risk of mpox wave. There are outbreaks and cases already occurring.
U.S. authorities are stepping up efforts to avoid an outbreak in this country, where mpox is mostly spread sexually. Their efforts include coordinating with leaders in the LGBTQ community, which was a high-risk group during the 2022 mpox outbreak. Gabriela Emanuel, NPR News.
Boeing's faulty Starliner capsule has left the International Space Station. Here's NASA's call on the Starliner undocking just a couple of hours ago.
Separation confirmed. Starliner is now backing away from station and starting its return to Earth.
Starliner launched in June with NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams on board, but the capsule suffered from thruster failures and helium leaks. Agency decided to leave Wilmore and Williams on the ISS through late February and bring Starliner back empty. The capsule is on track to land in New Mexico. Stocks lost ground on Wall Street to wind down a brutal trading week. The Dow fell more than 400 points today. I'm Jack Speer, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of all sizes to attract, interview, and hire candidates, all from one platform. Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR.
From the New York Times, I'm Katrin Venholt, and this is The Daily. The Supreme Court's decision to ban affirmative action last summer was expected to drastically change the demographics of college campuses around the country. Now, we're starting to understand the extent of that change. Today, my colleague David Leonard explains. It's Friday, September 6th.
Get ready to turn right. Turn
David,
right.
welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Katrin.
So, in the past few weeks, elite colleges around the U.S. have started to release their enrollment numbers for this academic year, which is the first academic year since the Supreme Court banned affirmative action. So, what have you seen so far?
So as you said, this is the first year of students who are coming after the Supreme Court decision in 2023 that said students cannot check a box about their race. You can take into account students' life experiences, including race, on an individual level, but you can't give these broad advantages to different groups in the process. And people care about this, even though it's in a relatively small number of schools, because these schools confer big economic advantages on the people who go there, according to recent economic research, and they disproportionately create the American elite. Senators and Supreme Court justices and CEOs disproportionately come from these several dozen schools. And so the first of these schools to report the demographics for the new freshman class, these are the classes that have just arrived on college campuses in the last few weeks, was MIT. And they reported this really big decline in the number of black students. It had been 15% last year. It's 5% this year in the first year class. And a decline in the number of Hispanic students from 16% down to 11%. The number of Asian students went up significantly, and the number of white students remained roughly constant.
So this is basically a scenario that a lot of different people predicted, right? Defenders of affirmative action said after the decision came down that the share of Black and Latino students would likely plummet, and critics of affirmative action predicted that the share of Asian students would likely rise because affirmative action had suppressed their numbers.
That's exactly right. And there was at least one other school that had results that resembled MIT's. Amherst College, which is a highly selective college in Massachusetts, also reported meaningful declines. The share of black students went from 15% last year to 6% this year.
Wow.
The percentage of Hispanic students went from 12% last year to 8% this year. But it turns out, as we've gotten more schools reporting numbers, and even as we've dug a little bit into MIT's and Amherst's numbers, the picture's gotten a lot more complicated.
Complicated how?
Well, there are several schools where the share of black students remained almost exactly the same. So at Duke, the share of black students this year held steady at 13%, same as last year. At Yale, it held steady at 14%. At Princeton, it also held steady in the same range. And even at some of the schools that have reported big declines in the number of Black and Hispanic students, like MIT, the numbers may exaggerate how big the decline actually was. And that's because at several of these schools at MIT, a student who is multiracial counts in more than one category. So when you see the share of both Black and Hispanic students falling, there might be a single student who counts in both of those declines. And look, at several of these schools, including MIT, the Black and Hispanic share definitely did fall. It just may not have fallen as much in real human terms as some of those numbers suggested that it did.
Right.
And I want to emphasize that we're still really early in this reporting cycle. And I'm confident from talking to people that schools are going to be all over the map. They're not all going to be like MIT, or they're not all going to be like Duke. But I don't think we yet know the mix of how many schools are going to remain roughly similar and how many are going to have big declines. And we're just going to need more time to find that out.
Okay, so clearly there is quite a lot of variation in this data, but just from what you're telling me, it seems like the share of Black students, at least overall, is down. It sounds like at best it's kind of stable for now, but in some places it actually dropped. So is that a pattern you're seeing here?
I think that is a pattern. And once more schools report, I think that's what we're going to end up seeing. The trends with Hispanic students, though, are a little different. Hispanic students are even more all over the map in terms of the trends. So there are schools like MIT where the share of Hispanic students fell. There are schools like Princeton and Yale where the share held roughly steady. But we even have an example so far among just a very few schools that have reported of a school where the percentage of Hispanic students rose, which is UVA. It's gone from 8% to 10% in 1 year. That's a meaningful increase. But there's another point to think about here. So far, Katrin, we've been talking about race. But if you look at economic data, it looks like the number of lower income students at many of these colleges is actually going up. So I'll give you two interesting examples. Duke and UVA. Duke is private, UVA is public. These are historically two of the least economically diverse colleges in America. And yet, we've really seen increases in economic diversity. So UVA reported that the percentage of students who received the Pell Grant, which is the largest financial aid program in the country, basically goes to people in the bottom half of the income distribution. The Pell share at UVA rose from 16 to 24 over the last year. At Duke, it rose from 17 to 22. And we're going to need more information to figure out exactly what's going on here, because the federal government did expand eligibility for the Pell Grant, which might explain a couple ticks of that increase. But it really seems like at a lot of these places, economic diversity has risen over the past year. And that's not a pattern that many people would necessarily have expected. And it's a fascinating pattern. And that, of course, raises the question of why is that happening?
We'll be right back.
The Daily is supported by Betterment, an automated investing platform that helps make it easy to invest. Learn more at betterment.com. Investing involves risk.
Innovative, immersive, and skillfully investigated. The Daily brings listeners today's stories as only the New York Times can report them. For more on today's episode, go to nytimes.com/thedaily. Distribution of The Daily is made possible by American Public Media. APM produces and distributes programs that inform and inspire, entertain, and engage audiences everywhere.
This is News 88.7.
On last week's Wait, interior designer Nate Berkus confessed he used to redecorate his friends' houses during playdates until their mother came home.
She said, "Did you move my sofa?" And I said, "Yeah, don't you think it looks better like this?" And she said, "I do."
Peter Sagal will add a bright splash of color to your radio. That's Wait, Don't Tell Me from NPR.
Saturday and Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock here on News 88.7.
Life coming at you fast? Many times, there's not enough hours in the day to follow all of Houston's news. When you find yourself too busy to stay informed, we have two words for you. Hello, Houston. a daily newsletter delivered right to your inbox from Houston Public Media. Every morning, we bring you a quick recap of the previous day and a look ahead at the current day's news. Sign up today at houstonpublicmedia.org/Hello Houston.
The Supreme Court's decision to ban affirmative action last summer was expected to drastically change the demographics of college campuses around the country. Now, we're starting to understand the extent of that change. My colleague David Leonard explains. So David, I want to dig a little deeper into this frankly surprising finding that we discussed in the first half. Why is it that post-affirmative action economic diversity has gone up at these schools?
Well, one thing that seems to be happening is that the number of upper income Black and Hispanic and multiracial students at some of these schools, like MIT, has declined. And to some extent, at some of these schools, they have been replaced by lower income students of many races, potentially including lower income Black students and lower income Asian and white students. And the reason that would be is that the Supreme Court said you can no longer take into account simply a student's race. But the Supreme Court also said that colleges can very much continue to take into account students' life experiences. And so the main way that they would hear about students' experiences would be the essays. So if a student wrote about how they grew up in a neighborhood that was lower income, maybe an overwhelmingly Black or overwhelmingly Hispanic neighborhood, and they faced racial discrimination. Or maybe they grew up in a lower income, overwhelmingly Asian neighborhood and faced racial discrimination. The colleges can take all those into account.
Keep left. So in other words, this sort of stronger focus on these application essays, which surface these stories of overcoming, have kind of helped to lead to more socioeconomic diversity in these classes.
Keep left.
Because overcoming adversity isn't necessarily a racial issue.
Overcoming adversity absolutely can include race in the United States, given our racial inequities and given racial discrimination, but it's not only race.
David, I just want to gut check here. Now that affirmative action is no longer on the table, can we just assume that colleges are still trying to maintain the same degree of racial diversity?
Well, that's a fascinating question. If you ask colleges, they would have to say, by the letter of the law, that racial diversity, for its own sake, is not something that we are emphasizing or considering in our application process. But we know that these colleges, and they've said this, they believe deeply in the value of racial diversity. They think it produces better education for their students. They think it means that the students who are on campus, who are not from one of the largest groups, don't feel alone. So they care a lot about it. But your question is also scraping at something interesting here, which is there are certainly conservatives and opponents of affirmative action who are worried that schools are going to cheat, who are worried that schools are going to say we are taking into account the student's individual experience. But actually, the schools often have ways of knowing a student's race, whether it's from the essay or from other information in an application. And there are certainly conservatives who are worried that schools are basically going to try to hit their exact diversity targets as before for the sake of it. Schools, meanwhile, are very worried about being sued. And so I think that we can expect conservative legal activists, the same folks who brought the lawsuits that led to this Supreme Court decision, to be scouring this data and potentially filing suit against schools that report very similar numbers as in the past and accusing them of still taking into account race while pretending not to. We are almost certainly going to see more legal fights over this issue.
But one of the interesting things here, David, is that in order to comply with the ban on race-based affirmative action, it seems that some of these colleges might actually be looking at class as a proxy for race, presumably in the hope that, selecting for a more economically diverse class would also lead to more racial diversity. But that doesn't totally seem to be working out.
Yes, I think they are using class in part as a proxy for race, but you're absolutely right. There is no perfect proxy for race in the United States of America. Our racial gaps are just too big. So even if colleges lean heavily into economic affirmative action, they really might not be able to replicate the percentage, particularly of Black and Native students, that they had before affirmative action was outlawed by the Supreme Court. But colleges can take into account wealth, and the wealth gap by race in our country is bigger than the income gap. They can take into account neighborhood poverty. They can take into account the kind of high schools that students go to. And I think there's a very strong argument that they should be taking these factors into account. I mean, if a student is growing up in a high poverty high school with a family that has a very low net worth, those factors really do affect the student's ability to do schoolwork. And so one of the things we hear from colleges is that they are trying to think about disadvantage in this broader way than they were before the affirmative action decision.
So are there any concrete examples of schools doing what you're saying? You know, looking at socioeconomic factors in this broader way?
Yeah, there are a few. So one thing that multiple schools are using is a tool from the College Board. The College Board is the organization that gives the SAT and gives the AP exams. And the College Board gives colleges a dashboard so that the colleges can see not only what are a student's scores, but what is the context in which that student is coming from. So these AP tests, for example, the top score you can get is 5. Now, if you get a 4 coming from a top high school, that means one thing. But if you come from a high school where you're the only student who managed to get a 4 on a given AP exam, that's really impressive. And colleges are then able to take into account, look, it looks like this student can do the work at our college, and this student is one of the very, very best students in his or her community. That's one example. A second example is recruitment. A bunch of these colleges are doing more to go to neighborhoods and high schools that have historically not sent many kids to those colleges and try to do more to encourage students to apply. UVA, the University of Virginia, is a specific example. They've launched this program called All Virginia. And it seems like it made a difference. I mean, the Black share at UVA fell, but not much. It fell from 11% to 9%. And some of the other schools that have seen their Black share hold steady are also doing these recruitment efforts. And then a third thing is money. A whole bunch of schools are out there trying to raise money from their alumni and others specifically to pay for financial aid. They are saying, hey, give us money so we can afford to enroll more students who don't pay tuition or who don't pay much tuition. And that can also help with racial diversity.
So if schools are really committed, that's what I'm hearing you say, and they put in a lot of intentional effort and a lot of money, they can potentially achieve a level of both economic diversity and racial diversity without necessarily violating the affirmative action ban.
Yes, and we do have some history here. In several states, race-based affirmative action has been illegal for a long time, more than 20 years. California, Texas, these are big states, and the state law said race-based affirmative action is not okay. And so if you look at what the selective colleges in those states did, one of the things you notice is this isn't a simple before and after. Colleges need time to figure out what kind of programs they want to put in place that might make a difference. And so if you look at California, for example, it is absolutely the case that the number of Black students in particular at the most selective University of California campuses, which are Berkeley and UCLA, fell a lot right after California banned affirmative action. And it is true that Berkeley has really struggled to recover the share of Black students that it had before the law changed. But UCLA, which is essentially as selective as Berkeley, has made much more progress. 25 years ago, the share of Black students at UCLA was about 3%. Today, it's closer to 7%, which isn't that different from the share of Black residents of California. And in 1999, the share of Hispanic students at UCLA was 13%. Today, the share of Hispanic students entering UCLA is 24%. It has risen really quickly, even without affirmative action in California. And that's because of much broader trends. There's been a whole lot of research tracking the outcomes of immigrants. It's been part of this recent big data revolution in economics, in which researchers can study millions of tax records and census records and get a sense for families' trajectories over time. And what it shows is that not only Asian families, but also Hispanic families, immigrant families, are doing extremely well. when you look at measures like education and income, the recent immigrants, both Asian and Hispanic, immigrants themselves often remain poor for their lives, but their children do so much better. And so when you think about that larger reality, it means that perhaps colleges need to worry a little bit less about what their enrollment of Hispanic students are going forward, even with this decision. I think the story starts to become very different when you're talking about groups that have experienced centuries of discrimination and oppression in this country. And that is specifically Black Americans and Native Americans.
And of course, the whole point of affirmative action from the outset was to correct for racial injustice in America, basically to help right those historic wrongs like slavery. So how should we be thinking about that original goal now? And is there room, in the light of this sort of ruling that came down a year ago, to design a more targeted remedy specifically addressing this particular historic injustice?
I don't know. And I think it's a great question. There was a fascinating discussion during the Supreme Court arguments over this case about whether, for example, a college could consider whether an applicant came from a family that had been enslaved. And Justice Kavanaugh, who of course is a Republican appointee, suggested that he might be open to such a policy. Now, it was a brief conversation, and I don't know whether you could, but that's a really tricky question, right? Because the notion of did you have an ancestor who was enslaved is not a question about race. But of course, in the United States, we know that that is referring to only one race. And so you can imagine, particularly if the numbers of Black students look really worrisome in coming years, that colleges might try to get more aggressive about those kinds of questions. But it is certainly something that would have to be the subject of future legal cases. And I think one thing to keep in mind is it's not as if the system before the Supreme Court's decision was working particularly well from anyone's perspective. So conservatives, of course, were unhappy with the system with racial categories. That's how we got the case, and it's how we got a conservative Supreme Court saying you can't use these racial boxes. But the old system was also not that easy to defend on progressive values. I mean, several years ago, multiple elite colleges had more students coming from the top 1% of families based on income than the entire bottom 60%.
So kind of affirmative action for the rich, actually.
Yes, and the idea that these colleges that are supposed to be meritocracies had more students from the top 1% than from the entire bottom 60% is very hard to defend with any set of progressive values. And now we have a new system. And it seems as if this new system may increase economic diversity, just as you were saying. It also has the potential to decrease racial diversity and aggravate racial inequality in a country where racial inequality is a deep and abiding problem. And so as we think about this going forward, whatever your views are, you're probably going to look at this system a few years from now and say, it changed in some ways that are problematic, and it changed in some ways that are positive. And over time, the colleges are going to try to increase the positives and decrease the problematic aspects of it.
Well, David, thank you very much.
Thank you, Katrin.
The Daily is supported by C3 Generative AI. C3 Generative AI enables rapid access to secure, traceable, hallucination-free insights from enterprise systems, all while using any LLM, helping enterprises turn the invisible into the obvious. C3.ai. This is Enterprise AI. Listeners of The Daily, get to the heart of the stories shaping the world. For more on today's episode, go to nytimes.com/thedaily.
The Daily is powered by the journalism of the New York Times and is distributed by APM, American Public Media. You can go deeper into the stories you hear on The Daily at nytimes.com/thedaily. That's it for the Daily. I'm Katrin Benholt. See you on Monday.
On the second Monday of every month, we welcome your gardening questions for Meg Tapp from the Garden Club of Houston. Send them now to talk@houstonmatters.org or call in and join us live on the air Monday on Houston Matters.
Monday morning at 9 o'clock.
Support comes from Comcast Business, partnering with companies to help keep their business moving by offering a network of cybersecurity solutions and round-the-clock support. Powering possibilities. Restrictions apply. ComcastBusiness.com.
My name is Benji Jones, and I'm an environmental correspondent at Vox. So this last July, I went to a small island in the South Caribbean called Bonaire, and it's famous for its coral reef and for shore diving. And I'd heard that this reef is in really good shape, so I was really excited to see it because so many reefs around the world are just suffering from all kinds of issues. So I sunk down beneath the waves. And honestly, what I saw was pretty incredible. There were giant coral structures, sea turtles, sharks. It looked like this reef was doing really well, and it gave me hope for the future of coral reefs around the world. Like, I actually felt positive for once, and I'm excited to talk about it on Today Explained.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. President Biden ended the week in the same place he started on Labor Day, the battleground state of Michigan, where he urged union members, including plumbers, pipe fitters, and steel workers, to vote for Kamala Harris in November. Biden also countering attacks on the economy by former President Trump and Republicans, saying inflation is way down.
My predecessor is seeking office again, promised infrastructure week every week in the 4 years he was president. And he never built a damn thing. Not one thing. Not a joke. Not one. Well, Kamala and I have made sure Michigan receives so far, $10.9 billion.
President Biden also promoted the latest data on unemployment, saying job growth has been up 42 months in a row. The 14-year-old student charged in a mass shooting at a Georgia high school made his first court appearance today, followed by his father, who also faces charges. Both remain jailed tonight without bail. As the community mourns the deaths of 2 students and 2 teachers, it's also grappling with copycat threats, as Sarah Callis of Georgia Public Broadcasting reports.
Stella Silva Garcia was already scared to send her 12-year-old son back to school after the Appalachia High School shooting. Then her son Lucas showed a social media post of a gun with text over it, saying his middle school is, quote, next.
We are physically, emotionally traumatizing these children.
Garcia described the situation as a nightmare. Lucas's school was not closed, but additional law enforcement officers monitored the school. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation says it is investigating threats made against schools around the state, and arrests have been made. For NPR News, I'm Sarah Callis in Atlanta.
It was a down day on Wall Street. The Dow lost more than 400 points, down 1%. This is NPR. Brazilian musician Sergio Mendes has died at the age of 83. He brought bossa nova music to global audiences in a prolific career that spanned more than 60 years and renewed itself over the decades, as Julia Canero reports.
Best known for his renderings of Mais Que Nada, here recorded with the Black Eyed Peas, musician Sergio Mendes was an ambassador for Brazilian music. He took bossa nova and samba rhythms to the world, giving them a unique twist. A composer, pianist, producer, and singer, Mendes emerged with the bossa nova movement in the 1960s. He moved to the U.S. in 1964, fleeing Brazil's dictatorship. This changed his music. Over the years, he worked with artists like Frank Sinatra and Cannonball Adderley, and more recently, rappers Common and Buddy. Mendes had been suffering from long COVID and died in Los Angeles. For NPR News, I'm Julia Carneiro in Rio.
Boeing's problem-plagued astronaut capsule Starliner heading back to Earth empty after undocking from the International Space Station today. NASA decided it was too risky for its 2 test pilots to return due to thruster failures and helium leaks on the Starliner. The astronauts' 1-week mission now extended for several more months, returning sometime early next year. This is NPR.
Hi, I'm Camille Nelson, your member relations specialist. If you are a monthly Always member and need to update your donation payment method, you can go online to houstonpublicmedia.org/update. Our easy online form will ensure that your information remains secure. Also, consider making the switch to EFT. You will help lower our processing cost, which puts more funding into the programming you love, trust, and rely on. Thank you.
On last week's Wait, interior designer Nate Berkus confessed he used to redecorate his friends' houses during playdates until their mother came home.
She said, "Did you move my sofa?" And I said, "Yeah, don't you think it looks better like this?" And she said, "I do."
Peter Sagal will add a bright splash of color to your radio. That's Wait, Don't Tell Me from NPR.
Saturday, Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock here on News 88.7.
Keep right and then turn right.
Today Explained here with Benji Jones, an environmental correspondent
Turn
at
right.
Vox. Benji, why did you choose to go to Bonaire? Their coral reefs are better than your average coral reefs?
Yeah, I mean, I spend so much time writing about the decline and destruction of ecosystems, including reefs, and I heard that this reef was doing pretty well, and so I wanted to see, okay, is there something special about the coral reef here that could help reefs elsewhere that are not doing well?
Why is this particular reef doing better than most, Benji?
So scientists think that this reef is in really good shape relative to other reefs in the Caribbean because of a long history of conservation. And that includes restrictions on things like fishing. One other thing which is definitely worth noting is that Bonaire is just below the hurricane belt, so like the area where hurricanes in the Atlantic tend to travel, and that prevents like massive impacts from storms, which is also very important.
And this is an urgent issue because coral reefs aren't just important for people who like scuba diving.
Yeah, exactly. So for one, they are incredibly important if you live by the coast and are subjected to hurricanes, because coral reefs are giant structures underwater and they basically function like seawalls. So when a hurricane's coming to shore or a big tropical storm, they can actually dampen the waves that are crashing against the coast and reduce flooding as a result. So super valuable if you live along the coast. They also are home to as much as a quarter of all marine life. So like fish, crustaceans, shrimp, all these animals need the reef to survive. Really important for seafood, and then also tourism. So I like to dive, lots of people like to snorkel and dive, and that is a major driver of tourism in places like the Florida Keys, other islands in the Caribbean. So really, really important economic engines throughout the Caribbean and much of the tropics,
Go straight
really.
on.
This is part of our heritage. This is part of our history. It is what the majority of our economy depends on. So even though it is an uphill battle, we can't afford to just give up. If we just give up, it is giving up on our history, giving up on our heritage, but also giving up on our livelihoods.
And as you've written about many times, and many other people have written about, coral reefs all over the world are in big trouble. How bad is it?
They're among the most imperiled ecosystems, period. So it's like literally half of these ecosystems are gone. And it's especially dire in the Caribbean, where you see at least 50% coral declines, but perhaps much more. It's not totally clear yet. But just in general, the Caribbean is really, really suffering from all kinds of threats.
And the major threat here is climate change?
So climate change is definitely a big one. So when ocean temperatures rise, which is happening right now, that ends up really harming coral, which is an animal, and coral depends on a kind of algae that lives inside of its tissue. It's like a symbiotic algae, and when it gets too hot, that algae leaves the coral, and then the coral doesn't have all these things that the algae provide, which includes food and its color. So the reason coral reefs are beautiful is because of that algae. But the big one is that if they lose that algae, they lose a big source of food and they can starve to death. And that's what bleaching is. So when you hear about coral bleaching, it's this loss of that algae.
The water is right now at around 29 degrees.
Yeah.
Which is right below the bleaching threshold.
Yes.
But you can already see paling in a lot of the corals.
But especially in the Caribbean, you have all kinds of other threats. So pollution, coastal development, all those hotels that are going up, they often get built atop corals. you also see a lot of overfishing. So when you take away fish that eat seaweed, for example, seaweed is really harmful for coral. So you remove the fish that eat the seaweed competes with the coral. It's harder for the reef to recover. So there are just like a lot of different things going on in the Caribbean, and it's been a decline for many decades at this point. This is not just climate change. Climate change is just a more modern threat.
Did you say, Benji, that coral is an animal?
Yes. Okay, coral is an amazing creature.
I'm sorry. I've been thinking about this since you said it, and I thought coral was a plant.
I know. I mean, I'm glad that you didn't say coral is a rock, because I think a lot of people think they're rocks. They kind of look like rocks, especially when they're not super colorful. But yes, coral is an animal, and actually it is a group of animals. It's a colony. So when you see like a chunk of coral underwater, it's like hundreds or thousands of these little animals that build a colony, and they build skeletons. That's like the hard structure of the coral. And those little animals are called polyps. If you look really closely, like under a microscope, they look like little sea anemones. They have tentacles that they use for feeding. But yeah, they're very much animals, and I think they're amazing organisms.
Okay, Benji, quite a detour, but I had to go there. Let us get back to Bonaire,
Yes.
this island you went to in the Caribbean. Before we talk about the reef there, tell me about the island. What's it like?
Yeah, okay, so Bonaire is such an unusual place. So it is this small island not far from Venezuela, like really far south in the Caribbean. It is Dutch, part of the Netherlands, and it is just half the size or so of Chicago, so tiny. And one of the things that I love about this island is that on the surface, it's basically a desert. It's covered in sand and red rock, and there are cactuses everywhere, and there are wild donkeys all over the place that like were once brought there for some kind of labor, and there are goats. So it's like very bizarre on the surface.
Wow.
There's not much like abundance of plant life. It doesn't have a jungle. But then you contrast that with what's happening underwater, which is that there is this incredible, enormous reef that surrounds the entire island. And also the water is so freaking clear. I mean, it is like, it looks like paradise when you are looking at the water. It is this brilliant blue, turquoisey. Oh, it's so inviting, and you want to be in the water.